But I would like to start with the second day of the Eastern track. And it is my great honor to introduce Professor Geetam Tiwari. She is Professor Emeritus at the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, and was the head of IIT Delhi's Transportation Research and Injury Prevention Center from 2021 to 2023. She has a master's and a PhD degree from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and she has mostly been working at traffic and transportation planning for pedestrians, bicycles, and bus systems. She has also worked with Indian cities, states, governments, and national governments on various public transportation and road safety projects, and led the Bureau of Indian Standards Committee on Transportation Services. She's also a member of the Indian Roads Congress Committee for Safety Standards and the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Injury Control and Safety Promotion since 2009. And he has served also in the board of India's Urban Mass Transit Company and NIT Harmipur for many years, and currently serves on the board of the International Association for Traffic Safety Science, IATSS, Lead India, and Delhi's Integrated Multimodal Transportation System Company. She's also the recipient of many national and international awards, including an honorary degree from Sweden's Chalmers University. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Professor Geetam Tiwari. She's going to be talking about the challenges of meeting global targets for road traffic fatality reduction. Professor Tiwari.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that introduction. And lovely to be here. It's an honor to be part of this amazing effort, which earlier we were discussing costs nothing, and it is really bringing a lot of researchers of all ages together. So let me begin with this topic that we decided for today's discussion: the challenge of meeting global targets for road traffic fatality reduction. And why it is a challenge is, let me first just start with a quote by Mahatma Gandhi: action without knowledge is dangerous and worse than no action at all. So when we talk about this challenge, I think we just have to keep reminding us that the correct knowledge is absolutely important if we want to meet this challenge. So let me just start by sharing with you some data that World Health Organization published. The latest report was published in December 2023, and the report was kind of quite promising, somewhat promising, let me say that, because since 2010 to 2020 was declared as the global road safety decade of safety action. And WHO had set target for all countries and globally to reduce deaths by 50% by 2020. Very few countries met that target, but few countries did meet the target. However, first time it was observed, as it is shown in this graph, that from 2011, when the reported deaths were about 1.25 million per year, it has come down to 1.19 million. So first time globally, overall reduction has been reported. So this is a promising trend. However, the difficulty, and here this graph is showing that in 60 reductions in the number of deaths occurred in 108 countries. Only 10 countries met the target, which was reduction by 50%. In 66 countries, still the number of deaths increased. And 28 of these countries are in the African region, which has risen 17% in the number of deaths since 2010. So essentially, globally, we have seen reduction. However, there are countries, and especially in Southeast Asia region and African region, where urbanization is happening, where growth is occurring, the number of deaths are also increasing. So this is a worrying trend, and this is a big challenge for everyone to address this issue. So before we get to understanding what exactly is happening in this region, here is a graph which is showing that historically what we have learned. and what happened in the countries which have been successful in reducing number of deaths, and these are the countries which are meeting the current targets also. So here you see a graph for about 16 OECD countries, mostly European countries, but of course Japan is also there. And here you find that so the number of deaths per 100,000 population are reported from 1950 onwards. And two very clear trends one can see in this graph. First, that about mid-60s, almost all these countries start reporting reductions. And this reduction continues to all the number, I mean, 2010, and then the latest report shows that beyond 2010 also. However, from 1950 to about mid-60s and 1970s, all these countries are reporting increase. So here is a good data set and historical evidence to understand that what interventions worked, what efforts were done in these countries, which resulted in reductions, has a great lesson for other countries. And I won't get into too much detail here, but essentially, it was, if you see, and there are a lot of research papers and reports available, what happened before 1970s. Essentially, before 1970s, there was major emphasis on driver training, educating road users, increasing penalties, addressing black spots. And this effort had started from 1930s onwards, which did not result in reduction. However, by mid-60s, when many health professionals got involved and trying to understand the epidemiology of crashes, at that time, many of these countries established independent research agencies. NHTSA was established in US in about 1964-65. Research centers were established to document evidence, what is happening and how do we address this concern. And as a result of these efforts, new vehicle standards were established and new road safety standards were established. There was a lot of good understanding of how seat belts work, what is the advantage of helmets, what is the impact of speed, and how alcohol consumption is affecting road safety. So with this kind of scientific evidence and understanding, specific interventions were were established in these countries. And that is what really influenced the trend which we observe here, continuous downward trend. Now, the current report, Global Road Safety Status Report 2023, the numbers that I mentioned earlier, if you see here, this is actually shown different regions. So African region, region of the Americas, Eastern Mediterranean region, and so on. And the last bar chart is showing the global trend. The different colors also are showing different income levels of the countries. So here what in 2023, the numbers are telling us that number of deaths, number one, have region wise, overall Southeast Asia region, Western Pacific region, and African region is the highest. European region has the lowest. Second major trend is that the number of deaths are more in upper middle income countries, the orange color here, and lower middle income countries. Except in African region, the low income countries also are reporting a large number of deaths. So what the concern that we have now is that low and middle income countries continue to face with unacceptable level of road trauma. And there are problems that have so far proved resistance to the known interventions, which had proved very successful in earlier decades, as discussed in the previous slide. So the successful interventions are beginning, the impact of successful intervention is beginning to plateau. So clearly new knowledge generation is required and understanding what is required. And even in the other countries, and here we are showing number of deaths in EU. So even though overall there is a downward trend, but you can see that the rate of reduction is very, very low. So as said earlier, that the impact of non-intervention is plateauing, it's reducing. Uh, Countries where change in fatality has been observed by regions and country income levels in the last decade. Again, you see, as mentioned earlier, if we see the African region, the total number of countries have actually reported increase in deaths. There are few countries which report decrease, but the number of countries reporting increase in death is much higher. Same is the case with regions of the Americas, Southeast Asia region. So it's only in European region that this trend is different. And in Western Pacific region, this trend is different. So clearly what is happening in African region, region of the Americas and Southeast Asia region, we have to pay attention and understand that how to address this challenge in these. Now, even in EU countries, most countries have reported reductions, but it is quite uneven. Some countries have reported large reductions, like Norway, Greece, Lithuania, whereas there are few countries like Netherlands, especially Netherlands, very, very little reduction. So these differences are also important to understand, that overall there is a reduction, but what are the specific issues which is influencing these variations in different countries. Now, earlier trend we reported was that generally in high income countries, the number of deaths have decreased and continue to decrease. High income countries are mostly motorized countries also. But look at the difference between two major high income countries. Long-term trend, as reported in Japan, is continuous reduction from 2010 onwards to 2021. And at the same time, USA with high income, long-term trend is the increase in number of deaths. So this is basically pointing out that it's not only income, but something more than income which is having an impact, which is basically reporting these very different trends in similar income countries also. So globally now, we face that road traffic injuries continue to be the leading cause of deaths for children and young adults aged between 5 to 29. This is despite reporting slight reduction, 5% reduction in last decade. As shown here, all ages, ischemic heart diseases is number 1, stroke, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, etc. number 3. But for the people falling in the range of age of 5 to 29 years, road injury is number 1 cause of deaths and is number 1 cause of deaths. 92% of the world's fatalities on the roads occur in low and middle income countries, and more than half of all road traffic deaths are among vulnerable road users. This includes pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists. This was not the case in the earlier decades, the graph that I showed earlier. And all the research and a lot of interventions which we came up with as far as vehicle standards are concerned, as far as highway standards are concerned, addressed the occupants and users of motorized vehicles. And that motorized vehicle did not include motorcyclists. So this is the current challenge now. Low and middle income countries, victims are vulnerable road users, people outside the cars. So what kind of new knowledge generation and new interventions are required? So currently, World Health Organization specifies 5 main pillars of road safety. And these are the 5 main pillars. There is a lot of discussion and understanding of safe speeds. Safe speeds based on different contexts is basically influenced by human tolerance. Human people, depending on their age and whether they are inside or outside the car, the level of injury is basically because of speed, because speed is related to impact energy. And there is lot of research and already good understanding that impact speed of 30 kilometers per hour will result has only 8% risk of deaths for pedestrians, whereas same vehicle, same pedestrian, same driver going at a higher speed, and when the impact speed is 50 kilometers or above, the chances of death or the risk increases to 80 to 90%. So there is a lot of understanding of safe speeds, and safe speed is basically urban speeds, speeds near school zones, speeds on highways, speeds, roads passing through settlements. What is a safe speed gets decided by human tolerance level. We also have now over the years good understanding and evidence what are safe roads. Safe roads are mostly the standards have, as I mentioned earlier, are basically from the point of view of cars, motorized vehicles. So we have good understanding of road geometric standards. What should be the shoulder width? How should we design crash barriers, which leads to error avoidance? In case of there is an error, then how we can manage the severity and bring down the level of impact energy to human tolerance level. These are the principles which are used for designing crash barriers and roadside furniture. Safe vehicles, lot of all vehicle standards. What should be the windshield standard? What should be the how should we design airbags? How should we design seat belts, etc. Everything is again based on understanding of human tolerance. So a lot of good understanding there. WHO talks also about safe road users. And there is a discussion about educating the road users, training drivers, and strict penalties. And I have put question marks here because these are the specific strategies which were the main focus area uh, before 1970s in all countries, the graph that I was showing you earlier, OECD countries. And major focus on educating road users, training penalties, we saw that did not work. And I will elaborate on these specific issues because there's already a lot of good research available on this. And the last pillar is about post-crash interventions. And again, there is good understanding here that scoop and run is the best strategy to bring the patient to definitive care facility as fast as possible. Works very well. So we have had over the years now a lot of good discussion on, in fact, the 5 pillars that I'm showing you is also part of safe systems approach. Uh, after mid 90s and early 2000, most countries in the world now focus on what is a safe systems approach. And also in late 90s, Sweden came up with Vision Zero, which where the vision was that sometime in future, we should have 0 deaths and 0 serious injuries on roads. So it's a vision, and lot of research and lot of efforts have gone into making this vision. And every day research is happening, how we change the vehicle design, how we change the road designs, what speeds are best for different contexts, etc., is currently also continues to be a major research topic. Now, now I especially observed that 2015 onwards, there is a lot of discussion amongst many researchers that what is safe system approach and how it has been interpreted may be problematic. And perhaps this is one of the reasons that why the known interventions are the impact of known intervention is plateauing. So I quote this one research paper published in 2022, where two main issues have been raised. That interpretation of shared responsibility, because safe systems approach also talks about not only understanding of human error and human tolerance, but also that responsibility to be safe on the road is shared, not only road system designers, but also road users. And education and behavior of road user is why important. Now, this paper raises this question that interpretation of shared responsibilities are inconsistent with safe system, and defining and measuring the safe system as actions across multiple pillars misses the fundamental principles. So what does it mean? Number one, shared responsibility again starts, focusing on educating the road users. And if the road users, driver or other road users are not complying with all the laws all the time, then there has to be strict penalty. So this may not be the correct strategy. And based on this, we will not be able to meet all the challenges. Second is that we have road system, we have vehicle system, and we have road users. So all measures independently doing for vehicles, for roads, and for road users is not really safe system approach. System approach is that what the interactions are taking between different systems and really paying attention to that. So actions across many sectors cannot be equated to safe systems approach. Let's elaborate on this. And of course, then this understanding also tells us that the current dilemma for researchers and policymakers and practitioners both is that whether we continue the earlier successful approaches, because we know that vehicle design standards worked very well. We know that redesigning the roads for cars worked very well. But now it is resulting in small incremental improvements. But the second major challenge is that we have to adopt a paradigm shift because there are emergent risks. And emergent risk in the system is what we don't understand correctly. What emergent risk means is basically that how different systems are interacting with each other. It is not only road users, but how same road user in different types of roads would behave differently. That is what we have to try and understand. Before I elaborate on that, let me also quote another paper which talks about what is safety science and how we interpret it for traffic safety. So three important cornerstones have been discussed as far as safety science is concerned and traffic safety. And these three cornerstones are interdisciplinarity, problem-solving orientation, and systems approach. So interdisciplinarity is a first necessary condition to deal with complex phenomena. When we talk about road traffic safety, it is a complex phenomena because there are a lot of counterintuitive measures. There are many subsystems involved, and therefore we have to depend on interdisciplinarity. Such phenomena cannot be reduced to paradigmatic notions within one scientific domain. So we cannot independently talk about vehicles, or we cannot independently talk about roads. We have to look at all the interactions and how humans behave under that. So this requires mixing interdisciplinary effort. Second important cornerstone being problem solving orientation. So what is problem solving? Achieving consensus on a common problem definition is considered a second prerequisite for scientific approach of safety. And why this is important? Because interdisciplinary discourses may result in controversies and rivalries. So, and this is what we find in traffic safety also. There are traffic psychologists, people working on education, people working on training. They are very convinced that these are the strategies and we can improve and which would result in better traffic safety. Whereas there are other group of people, civil engineers would have different interpretation, mechanical engineers would have different interpretations, a traffic psychologist may have different interpretations. So it is and practitioners may have different interpretations. We have different road users, people inside the car, outside the car. Their understanding also is very different. So to solve this problem, we have to bring consensus. And interdisciplinary discourse, as I said earlier, may result in controversies, and this may lead to individual antagonism, defining minorities as dissenting voices in a homogeneous scientific community. So this would be another big challenge for safety science also. And systems approach requires, this facilitates in structuring a complex reality. We have to decompose in elements, components, aspects, and relations, which can provide oversight and coherence across different levels and understanding of interaction with each other. So this is what is required for safety science and definitely for traffic safety also. So now I want to share with you results of some very famous research which have been published and publicly available. And these are especially very, very important in understanding the third pillar that I had pointed out, that, again, going back and focusing on education, training, penalties, what will happen. So in early 1970s, there was a very famous study done by Stina Sandels in Sweden, Children in Traffic. And in her classic book, Children in Traffic, the Swedish psychologist Stina Sandels acknowledged that it is impossible to adapt fully small children to the traffic environment. They are biologically incapable of managing many of its demands. So children under 8 to 9 years with traffic safety education can have more crashes than those who don't. And this was a large study done in Sweden. And then Stina Sandel explained that why this was happening. So educating very young children below the age of 9 years will give us counterintuitive results. So as we know, that current understanding is that children cannot be left alone. They must be under adult supervision because they are biologically incapable of managing the multiple demands that the traffic environment poses. And there is then systematic review also done later. Another version was published in April 2022, Safety Education of Pedestrians for Injury Prevention. Pedestrian safety education can result in improvement in children's knowledge, can change observed road crossing behavior. But whether this reduces the risk of pedestrian, motor vehicle collision and injury occurrence is unknown. So even after many years, this study, a similar study gets repeated and we find similar results. What is the evidence for seat belts? So this review indicated that mandatory use legislation has a significant impact on increasing seatbelt use and decreasing fatalities. But if we depend only on educating people to wear seatbelts, that does not seem to be very effective. For driver education, again, a very interesting and large, robust study was done in US. This was done in mid 70s again by Insurance Institute of Highway Safety. And this evidence again showed that there were high school students. Uh, one set got 72 hours of education and another set got 24 hours of driving education. And then there was a set which had no education. And what was the involvement in crashes? As you can see here, there is hardly any difference. In fact, people who got no education had slightly lower percentage of crashes as compared to students who had got 72 hours of education. And this was also explained that in basically children who are not getting education through these programs, they learn driving they were learning driving from their parents and relatives, which delayed the license. They took 6 months to 1 year to get the license. And that is what made the difference, because we may learn driving through driving schools, but safe driving comes from experience. So there is a systematic review also now on driver education, and school-based driver education leads to early licensing and may increase road crash rates. There is a evidence again for young drivers. Passenger vehicle driver fatal crash rates per 100 million vehicles traveled by driver age and day. So very clearly we see that younger age group, whether it is night, especially at night, seems to have higher rates. And this is also explained because young people, we biologically have different hormones. They are risk takers. They like to take risks. So especially if an activity is viewed to be risky, the young age group likes to do it. So education or no education, it is very difficult to control this. And this is why what works is now, as we know in most countries, let me say most successful countries, there is this graduated driver licensing, a period of supervised driving before getting a basic driver license that introduces driving privileges in stages, providing an opportunity to gain experience and practice. So summary of licensing education and evidence is, there is no evidence that stricter licensing procedures for the general population reduces crash rates. Training with driving simulators does not reduce crash rates. Compulsory driver education in schools increase early licensing, and graduated licensing systems and curfews for teenagers show positive results. So the public health theory is that people know the messages but don't always follow them if the activity is compulsory. For example, looking after children, working, eating, drinking, etc. If it's an everyday activity and it has to be performed by everyone. So this is exactly, if we are understanding traffic safety as a public health problem, and being on the road, moving is an everyday activity. So we cannot depend only on road users always to do the right things. And every day on the road, we have these very different kinds of people, young people, people who have gone through personal tragedy or some acrimony in family, psychologically disturbed people. So we do expect these people to not always do the right things. So these people will not observe rules that day. And that is why the emphasis has to be on uh, systemic interventions. So based on this understanding, it is very clear that this concept of shared responsibility, or again, start focusing on road user education and behavior, is problematic. And basically, when we redefine our safe systems approach, and we clearly say that we do not depend on road user behavior. By education and training, this is what will push the boundaries. And the researchers working in these other fields will be forced to think about other strategies. So the removal of road user behavior as a factor to achieve safety will force system designers, road designers, vehicle designers, and operators to identify innovative solutions that protect road users, because not all road users will always do the correct things. And we will end up having stronger and different regulations for vehicles and road standards. So right now, we do depend a lot on enforcement, because for some of these strategies, we actually do not have enough understanding what else can be done. For example, helmets, and especially in low and middle income countries where large number of victims are motorcycle users, motorcycle can go at high speed. So helmet is the only one effective measure that we know to protect head injury. And the only way to enforce uh, compliance of helmet law is through enforcement. But now Safe Systems approach says that enforcement is an interim measure. And eventually we have to think about how to reduce risk for people who are using motorcycle users without this enforcement. Because enforcement again gets related to penalties and not everybody is going to comply with it. So interim measures are less sustainable and cannot eliminate the risk in the system. But as an interim measure for the time being, we have to focus on it. So now when we talk, the understanding, we say that the emergent risk that we have to understand in the three subsystems that we have for traffic safety. Road users, consisting of drivers, pedestrians, bicyclists, motorcyclists, etc. We have equipments and vehicles and protective products like helmets, another subsystem, and the infrastructure itself, highways, urban streets, etc., as the third subsystem. So here we see that the different levels of intersections are producing the emergent risk, which is what we have to understand in our future research now. Road user and vehicles. Certain vehicles, we are designing vehicles which can go with very high acceleration, with very good suspension. We don't feel the speed. So road user behavior is going to be different and the risks are going to be different. This is what we have to document and then see how we address and reduce this risk. Similarly, road user and infrastructure. There is already enough understanding that, wide lanes, wide shoulders will encourage road users to speed up, regardless of what the speed limits are in that context. So this, again, we have to understand that what kind of infrastructure design influences road user behavior, driver behavior, or pedestrian behavior that increases the risk. And therefore, how we can, by redesigning the infrastructure, we reduce the risk. And then finally, vehicle and infrastructure also. So we already have enough very good understanding of how cars and motorized, four-wheelers are interacting with infrastructure and what infrastructure designs can reduce the risk. Maybe we don't have at the moment enough understanding for motorized two-wheelers, which is the dominant motorized vehicle in African, is becoming in African countries, but already a dominant mode in many Asian, especially in low and middle income Asian countries. So we need to do more work in this area. Road user, vehicle and infrastructure, all this coming together, and what kind of emergent risks are produced by understanding all three of them together is another area, which is what is required for the future. So here are the emergent risks that I discussed earlier and examples of that. So the current picture is the two photographs here show these are high speed high-speed roads. The design speed here is 80 to 100 kilometers per hour. But you see, these highways are passing through towns and villages. And the stretch of this small town or village is almost uh, 1 to 1.5 kilometers. There is habitation on both sides. And this is meant for high-speed traffic. So we already know from our understanding that if people start crossing the road where the vehicles are going at 100 or 80 kilometers per hour, the chances of pedestrians surviving in this environment is extremely low. And for pedestrians, comfort and convenience of crossing the road at grade is always higher than understanding of risk. So what alternate designs can be done for these kind of high-speed roads? Or do we cannot have high-speed roads passing through towns and villages? Oftentimes, we are making these pedestrian overhead bridges. And what is the reason that despite a overhead bridge present there, which definitely will reduce risk, most people prefer to cross at grade. So does the construction of this footover bridge really reduces the risk? The answer is no. Pedestrians prefer to run across the road. And if they are running across a high-speed road, obviously the risk is very high. So understanding that this is what is pedestrians are wanting, this is what is most comfortable for them, then what strategies are there to reduce the risk? This is how pedestrian crossing is happening in many of the cities of low and middle income countries. With or without painted crossing, at grade crossing is preferred. So finally, to conclude then, we really have to improve our theoretical understanding and theoretical understanding of emergent risk. And for this emergent risk, the three cornerstones of traffic safety science that we talked about earlier, which other researchers have talked about, is what is really required to frame our new research questions and frame a new theory. The interdisciplinarity, problem orientation, and then working on this all together, systems approach. So I would like to stop here basically. And in case there are any questions or discussions, then we could take up some time for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Professor Tiwari, thank you very much. I think you'll find that the chat box has been very active, reacting to many of the things you showed in your presentation. But okay, so I want to start with the first question. I think after listening to your presentation, it comes to my very own intuition in the fact that we do a lot of things. We put a lot of rules on pedestrians, and that are very difficult to follow, right? Like you have to do a crossing, it's very far away. You have to take the pedestrian bridge, which essentially prioritizes cars. So in the end, I know you mentioned it has to be like a systems approach, but it seems that the biggest factor here is that we have to redesign our streets to make it harder for pedestrians to, harder for cars to accelerate and easier for pedestrians to walk and cross, right? Do you agree that the built environment probably has the strongest effect? Or do you think there are other effects related that are more important?
Definitely built environment. The biggest impact is built environment. And there are already, many of the successful countries are also working on these kind of strategies. For example, Sweden, they have lot of red light speed cameras on highways, not to penalize people, but to try and understand what are these sections, what kind of roads where people tend to overspeed. So this is for car drivers. Similar things are required for pedestrians because in low and middle income countries, that is the data shows that almost 30 to 40% of the deaths are pedestrian deaths and motorcycle deaths. So now we need to, similar understanding is required that, what kind of built environment we are creating where pedestrians are taking higher risk. And instead of focusing on penalizing pedestrians and creating what I say, more restrictive environment, fences, etc. Let us see what is convenient and what is an enabling environment. So now we have to two things. The challenge is to make a comfortable and enabling environment for pedestrians, which also reduces risk. So it is sometimes a conflicting requirement, but this is the new challenge that we have to address. That we are having roads where the motorized vehicles want to go fast, but easiest place for pedestrians to cross the street is at grade. What new built environment and what new road designs are required to address this concern? And I think we need a lot of new experimentation in our countries.
Thank you. So there's another question from Lynette. So she mentions that the context of road use is quite different in Southeast Asia. So there's more informal transport, two-wheelers and three-wheelers. Infrastructure is still catching up, and there's high population density in cities, right? So what might be the most impactful measure to address road fatalities in this region?
So one of the most important measure would be speed control by design. So we know that level of injury, severity of injury gets decided by impact speed.
Yeah.
And there's enough evidence, and through evolution processes, we are not designed for 50 kilometer speed. We are only designed for walking speed. So wherever we have exposure, pedestrians, high exposure, cities are meant for people, we cannot have high speeds. And instead of only relying on enforcement measures, of course, now we have a lot of new technologies, speed cameras, etc., which have proven very successful in many countries like France and many European countries. But in many low-income countries where the institutional mechanism is weak, enforcement is not so good, most effective strategy would be change in road design to control speeds. So we'll have to look at how we do texture change, how we do introduction of traffic calming in cities, which can bring down the speeds to tolerable levels.
Okay, thank you. Feel free to ask more questions in the chat box if you have more, because we have some time. So there's another question from Alberto. He says that in terms of systemic failures, should the obsession with cars at the expense of transit in the US should be part of this discussion?
Yeah,
A little bit of
absolutely.
cultural
I
issue there.
agree with that. And you saw that, I showed the graph. It is so, I mean, sometimes I also get surprised that US is one country where so much research has been done on this topic. There are large institutes and excellent experts. And this is one of those really challenging questions. US is, in last decade, is the only one of the important high-income countries where the number of deaths have increased. Most other high-income countries have reported reduction in deaths. So it is car dominance. It is also high-speed dominance. You see, in last few years, many of US states have increased speed limits. And this is despite having overwhelming evidence from US. What is the impact of high speeds on traffic safety? So as many researchers have talked about, speed control and alcohol continues to be the two biggest challenges all globally. Despite having so many penalties, so many restrictions on alcohol control and speed control, we are still, I mean, we know that in many EU countries have been successful in this. But how do you convince, policymakers and countries like US that speed control is required? Otherwise, we will not be able to meet this challenge. And US should be worried about it. 16% increase in last 1 decade. It's very serious increase.
I think Kara was mentioning something related to that in the chat box. So Kara, would you like to add something to this discussion?
Well, I'm sitting here on my living room floor and cell phone, although I'm watching this on the big screen thanks to casting the screen to a TV. But yeah, I think she's absolutely right about speed. And we just rented a car in Germany to see the Polish countryside, and I was so delighted to see the posted speed limit flashing all the time whenever we exceeded that posted speed limit. Here in the United States, there is almost no enforcement anymore. They don't want the police to interact with Americans because they know sometimes that can result in violence between, on the driver or on the police officer. And so they have called them away. And we lost a lot of police officers during the Black Lives Matter movement. And, COVID was very tough on all of our emergency personnel, as it probably was in your country. So there is just almost no enforcement. And yet Europeans they allow the automated speed enforcement. Very few places do in the U.S. California's governor, this is the most progressive state in the nation, he had to ask special permission to allow it in maybe 20 locations recently, a vast state with tens of millions of persons. Only like 20 automated speed enforcement points can be used, and they have to be advertised. And so I'm working on an app where you and I can just take our phones and record somebody doing something stupid, and then the AI, infers what the speed is and what the plate and the model number and make are, and then of course the user has to report the position and time, and that information becomes evidence that they should be paying attention to. So we're putting it in front of them, and if anybody wants to contribute to that, if anybody's really good at machine learning for computer vision, please do reach out to me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I agree. And all the things that Carla has mentioned in the chat box also completely. I mean, not enough time to discuss each one of it, but clearly that is the difference. Actually, the other trend which I did not mention in the first graph where I showed increasing trend up to 70s and decreasing, there was another very clear trend that to US to begin with is higher than, countries like UK and many other European countries. There is a decrease after 70s, but the gap still remains. And this is partly because of all the things which Carla has also mentioned, the land use, the car, dependence on car, etc., that continues.
Thank you. There's another question. So also from Alberto. So how to avoid middle-class African households pursuing this American dream? So it goes back to the previous question about the obsession with cars.
I mean, how to avoid is we don't have enough understanding. I mean, there are so many other challenges now. We are dealing with climate change. We are dealing with SDGs, so low carbon transport. Everything points to that car is not the answer. And how do you avoid it? I would say first, really good emphasis on urban planning, how we plan our cities, which encourage other modes. Good lot of investment and focus on creating very strong, good public transport systems. And because sometimes I feel that even two-wheeler, which is what is really increasing in many Asian and African countries, giving personal motorized mobility, continues to have really high risk. So we have to, I think the focus for these all the remaining countries, African region, Asian region, has to be good public transport and cities meant for walking, bicycling, specific measures for this, and this is giving you multiple benefits. Overwhelming evidence, what are the health benefits overall, other health benefits, environment benefits. We meet also the climate changes. So there are so many other things which are also related to traffic safety. If we don't have safe infrastructure for bicycles, for walking, public transport, we are not meeting many other targets. So I guess a lot of these efforts have to come together in African countries and in Asian countries. And it is clearly pointing out that avoid the low density urban sprawl kind of development, go for high density, mixed land use, focus on creating, prioritize pedestrian, bicycles, and public transport. by policy and by real investments in it.
Thank you. So we have time for a few more questions. So I have another one. I think the plot that you showed about the accident rate, you're using basically the number of accidents per capita, right, per 100,000. But a very common exposure measure in transportation is accidents per vehicle kilometers traveled. And there's been a lot of criticism because that basically means that if you make the denominator bigger, so you make people drive more, then that will reduce the rate, right?
Yeah,
So what do
yeah.
you think about, it's very common in transportation to use that one. What do you think about the use of accidents by VKT?
Yeah. So the reason most safety people use deaths per 100,000 population, because traffic safety has been understood as a public health problem. So just like we report deaths due to tuberculosis, deaths due to malaria per 100,000 population, it is similarly we are reporting traffic deaths per 100,000 population. It is telling us the extent of the problem in the population. And just like, malaria, you do any public health problem, it is public government responsibility to create the right environment. Similar efforts are required here. So you're absolutely right. All the other measures, we have number of deaths per 10,000 vehicles, we have number of deaths per vehicle kilometers traveled. This is all giving us different information. So number of deaths per 10,000 vehicle is used by insurance companies, vehicle insurance companies, because that is telling you probability of death, a probability of your vehicle getting involved in a serious crash. So that is the information they use to fix your premium. For vehicle kilometers, it is, yeah, you're right. It is not really talking about, is it pedestrian? It is just, and every time, because there are more people traveling longer distances, it keeps on reducing.
Yeah,
So this is
exactly.
not telling you the problem. And then one could also, another measure take, what is the number of, probability risk per trip.
Yeah, that thing,
So
yeah,
that
very
is,
much
yeah,
more.
so that also is telling me my personal risk
Yeah.
every time I make a trip. So is it going to influence my decision to, travel by a certain mode or not? If I perceive that bicycling is very risky because per trip the risk is increasing, I stop bicycling. So these different measures are used, but for traffic safety, public health measure is what is most experts use this because this is a public health problem. Deal it as a public health problem.
I think also because if you think about, like now we talk about, as you mentioned, high density and mixed use, right? So if you live in a high density mixed use development, your VKTs are going to be very small, right? But you still have to go out. So
Right.
maybe like maybe a per trip measure might be a little bit more accurate, reflecting the needs of actually going out to engage in activities. And maybe those without that bias that comes from just people driving more and more.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question if there is anything else. I think from by Nasser, right? So has the widespread adoption of micromobility devices contributed to the increase in fatalities in the US?
Yeah, micro devices like e-bicycles, etc., right?
Yes.
So e-bicycle, the problem is it can go a little fast, and we don't have any, and the user is completely exposed.
Yes.
There is no protection around you. So it's very much like bicycle in that sense. So unless you have a dedicated infrastructure or you have speed control of other vehicles, it will remain as a high risk. And in fact, UK also has reported number of bicycle accidents increasing because we do not have good bicycle infrastructure everywhere. So for pedestrian and bicycle, because the user is completely exposed, in any road where the motorized vehicle is above 30 kilometers per hour, we have to have physically separate infrastructure. That is a prerequisite to reduce risk. But if we simply introduce these, micro mobility e-bicycles or bicycles without dedicated infrastructure, yes, number of cars go down. However, the risk to these users will remain high.
Thank you very much. I think we are right on time, so I would like to wrap up this session. So again, Professor Geetam, thank you very much for a very insightful presentation, and hope you can stay around to see the next amazing sessions that we have.